recording. There we go. The purpose for recording the meeting, we're going to be posting this online. So it'll be on the project website, and folks that were not able to attend, or maybe if you have to hop off a little bit early, you can still see the meeting in its entirety, both the presentation and the discussion. Again, this is one of 2 meetings that will be offering the same presentation so that we could kind of try to fit into folks' schedules. Of course, the discussion will be different because I imagine that it will be a different group attending the meetings, but both of the recordings for the meetings will be found online. The chat box is going to be open throughout the course of the meeting. You are welcome to put any comments or questions that you have in the chat box. That being said, we do have a pretty detailed presentation that we'd like to share. And we're going to do our best to make it as quick as possible, but it is a bit dense. And so that being said, it'll probably be best if we hold comments and questions for after the presentation, and then we can hop back through and look at the different slides and make reference to those. But the chat box is going to be open throughout the presentation, so feel free to put any comments or questions into the chat box, and then once we kind of wrap up the presentation, we can go back through and address comments and questions in the chat box, as well as anyone who wants to ask comments or questions, that type of thing. Will be important that everybody please stay muted during the presentation. And then once we are open in discussion, if we can kind of be muted when you're not speaking so that everyone can hear the speaker clearly while they're commenting or asking questions, that type of thing. Like Auntie Barbara mentioned in her pule, it is really important that we bring aloha as best we can into this forum and into this conversation. We will be talking about some pretty heavy things, I think, and there will be definitely some competing perspectives and opposing viewpoints on different topics. So I think as long as everyone is understanding of each other's perspectives, respectful and patient in both sharing your own mana'o and listening to other folks' mana'o. I think that is probably most important so that we have a really productive and beneficial meeting. And then lastly, I wanted to cover just a couple quick shortcuts for Zoom. So for muting and unmuting, if you are, right now, I don't actually see anybody that has called in on the telephone. So it looks like everyone has called in over the Zoom platform, either kind of on your mobile device or on a laptop. If you have a keyboard, then you're able to kind of use some shortcut keys. So muting and unmuting, you can just do Alt-A, or you can, on the little toolbar, you can toggle and untoggle the microphone icon. During the discussion, if you want to raise your hand to kind of earmark yourself and be able to get into the discussion, then you'll want to, if you have a keyboard, use Alt-Y as a shortcut, or you can click on the taskbar. There's the little more buttons, and then click on reactions and raise hand. There are a few other ways that you can do it as well, so I'll leave that to the Zoom experts, but that's just one shortcut way to do so. And then for the chat, you can, on the taskbar, click on the chat and it should open a chat box for you. And again, the chat box is going to stay open throughout the meeting. We'll do our best, either myself or Sherry will be responding to anything critical in the chat box, but best if we can kind of log questions and comments in there and then get back to them at a little bit of a later time. Okay, so our meeting agenda, Pule is Pau. We're going to be doing a brief introduction and project overview. And then Sherry's going to be talking a bit about Moloka'i Island water resources and water systems. We're going to share preliminary water use and future water demand. And then we're also going to be kind of talking about potential water supply options to meet that future demand, and then covering next steps in this planning process. Starting with project team introductions, why don't we start with Maui County folks, Eva and Marty, if you don't mind. And I can stop share real quick so that the slideshow isn't taking up all of the gallery there. So Eva and Marty, whenever you have a chance.
Thanks, Lily. This is Eva Blumenstein. I'm the Planning Program Manager with Maui County Department of Water Supply.
Hey, I'm Marty Buckner. I work for Eva, and I gathered the data and worked with Sherry extensively. And so I'm thankful that you all are here to enjoy the data we put together. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva and Marty. Sherry, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'll toss it over to you. So aloha again, everyone. My name is Lily Moloka'i. I'm one of the planners with Townscape Inc. We are consultants working with Maui County Department of Water Supply on this plan. I'll be talking a little bit more about kind of the project overview and explaining the plan in more detail in further slides. But my kuleana with this particular project is working mostly with community outreach and helping to kind of gather community voices and helping to write the plan as well. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Hirooka, also with Townscape, kind of here to pitch in wherever I can. Been working with Marty on some of the data crunching, and we'll be working after this on some of the water options, the water source options. And so looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say tonight. Thanks.
Aloha, everybody. I'm Bruce Tuchida. I started Townscape 31 years ago. And so far, I think our little company has completed something like 200 or more plans of various kinds, including quite a number of water resources plans. I'd like to say, though, that this Moloka'i water plan is in many ways the most difficult plan that we've ever undertaken. The water resource issues, community issues, island issues are very complex, as you folks well know. So we have made some progress. We've got a long way to go yet in developing this plan. And before we get into the details of today's presentation, I just want to appeal to Moloka'i folks for your help and assistance, because certainly we welcome your questions and criticism, but we also need your knowledge and your assistance so that we can put together a plan that is good for Moloka'i and the Moloka'i community. So thanks.
Hello, Bruce. So I'm going to screen share again, folks. All righty, that should have come through for everybody. So I want to talk just real briefly about the Water Use and Development Plan. So it is very complicated, like Bruce said. The Water Use and Development Plans are mandated by state water code. Each county is required to produce this type of plan. And the plan is meant to analyze current water use, look at future need for water, and make a plan to kind of how to meet that future need. In addition to that, these types of plans are meant to look at all water resources, water systems that are beyond just the county's purview, but all of the public and private systems, as well as all of the water resources and the interconnection between, groundwater, surface water, near shore and ocean environments, and how all of those overlap. So the overall goal of the plan is to find a balance between preservation and management of Moloka'i's water resources and sustainable water use and development to serve present users and future generations. Now I have a short kind of project milestones, project timeline here. And we started this project in March of last year. We anticipate that the project will go into next year. We've completed that first component, so kind of preliminary analysis of resources, issues, and needs. We're in the process of putting together all the components for like a preliminary draft of the plan. And then the next kind of big component would be having a draft of the plan that goes out to community folks for you folks to kind of look at the details of the plan written out and see where we can kind of massage it and work on it to make sure that it is the appropriate plan. A little bit of context. These are all the components of the Hawaii Water Plan. So this graphic is meant to kind of illustrate all of the different pieces that go into the overall state water plan. So you can see where the Moloka'i Water Use and Development Plan is. We take into account the Moloka'i Community Plan update, which is, you know, like land use planning. We also look at DHHL's Moloka'i Regional Plan, as well as these kind of broader plans for the State Commission on Water Resource Management, Water Quality Plan, Department of Agriculture Plan, Engineering Division, and DLNR Plan. So there's a lot that kind of interacts in, or there's a lot that this plan will interact with, and it is reciprocal. These will also be informing county decisions, state decisions, you know, specifically Commission on Water Resource Management decisions. And so there is a pretty broad context for these water use and development plans. I wanted to give a very rudimentary overview of some critical parts of water law in Hawaii. I think it's important that we have a little bit of foundation in understanding the uniqueness of water resources from a legal perspective. And this helps to kind of inform some of the constraints that we have. So in Hawaii, some of the broader kind of guidance and law that we have starts with the Hawaii Constitution. It includes the public trust doctrine and also the precautionary principle. Now, again, this is a very, very simplified overview of water law. So if you want a lot of detail, then there's all kinds of courses that you can sign up for. But I'll just be jamming through this in a couple slides so that we can have some broader context. So for the Hawaii Constitution, the water appears in a couple sections. So this is Article 11, Section 1. It mentions that all public natural resources are held in trust by the state for the benefit of the people. And in Section 7, specifically to water resources, it mentions that the state has an obligation to protect, control, and regulate the use of Hawaii's water resources for the benefit of its people. The precautionary principle mentioned, I have a quote here from Commission on Water Resource Management. So basically, where scientific evidence is preliminary and not yet conclusive regarding the management of freshwater resources, which are part of the public trust, it's prudent to adopt precautionary principles in protecting the resource. So basically, the precautionary principle talks about erring on the side of caution, being a little bit more conservative. But it also has a bit about how even if the studies and research and findings are not conclusive, the state does have an obligation to act in protection and preservation. Oh, and I had a comment from Jonathan saying the public trust in water actually has its origins in Hawaii Kingdom law. The constitutional provisions acknowledge that and court rulings. Thank you, Jonathan. I think the overarching kind of point that I wanted to mention for understanding water in Hawaii is that water in Hawaii in general is pretty unique and complex from a legal perspective, from a cultural perspective, from a community perspective, and from an environmental perspective. Water rights and laws in the island are not necessarily comparable to other places, and the way that things are done in other places and the legalities are very different. All of these considerations kind of act to constrain options for water use sources and supply, because they help to make sure that we're interpreting things correctly and that accurate protections and preservations are in place. And discussions on water resources and their future must include an understanding of all of these provisions. I think I skipped a slide. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna jump back real quick. There we go. Okay, so water is a public trust. So the goal of the public trust doctrine is to protect public trust purposes. There's 4 priority purposes. So domestic water use of the general public, particularly drinking water. The exercise of Native Hawaiian and traditional and customary rights, including appurtenant rights. Reservations of water for Hawaiian homelands allotments, and also maintenance of water in their natural state. There, I think that makes a lot more sense. Jumping over to previous meetings. So we had our first meeting with community folks in June of last year. That was our Ho'olauna or introductory meeting. That followed up with a series of regional meetings in October of last year. So each of the regions, Central, East, West, and also one specifically for Moloka'i homesteads. And between the beginning of this project in March of last year to now, we've had, over 30 or so individual and small group talk story sessions just to help us to better understand the context and the details of all of the complex issues regarding water resources on Moloka'i. These are some of the critical water issues that have come up. Again, this is a very incomplete list. This is just some of the highlights of the critical water issues that we have heard from folks. Part of that is the geography of water demand. You can see in this map, most of the water resources live in the northeast section of the island, but a lot of the demand is in kind of central and western sections. Kualapu'u Aquifer is a pretty key location. It's where most of the groundwater resources come from for most of the folks on the island. There's issues between conflicts of the wells and also the use and allotment of all of the water resources found in the aquifer there. We have noticed, or we've had folks bring to our attention that there's a conflict between water withdrawals, so groundwater withdrawals and stream diversions, and stream and spring flow to the ocean and the environmental effects there. We've heard about how important water recharge is for folks and how they would like to see water recharge built into kind of future planning. How are we going to make sure that everything that is used and pulled out of the water resources is returned in abundance? There have also been folks who've talked about concerns about Moloka'i Ranch ownership as the major private landowner on the island and also as a water operator or water purveyor. At last we knew, the property is up for sale and the ownership is kind of out of country. So there's a lot of concern about impacts of that. We've heard a lot about deer and ungulate overpopulation and the effect on watersheds. We've heard about the high cost of water, especially for West End folks. We've also heard about the limitations on agricultural water supply, that is very constrained on the island and limited to certain places. We've also heard about zoning conflicts. So, it may be agricultural zoned area, but there aren't water resources or supply and systems that can allow for agricultural operations. We've also heard a lot about the critical need for surface water protection. Moloka'i Island is a groundwater management area, and some folks have expressed that they'd like it to also be a surface water management area. We've also heard lots about Kalaupapa's status, the fact that they're technically in a separate county, not a part of Maui County, and the effects of that status as a separate county, Kalawao County. We've also heard about certain water systems on the island already being at capacity, and the effect that that has on folks who are trying to connect to the water resources. And then another big concern is climate change. Climate change effects that we're anticipating. There's, drier areas could potentially get drier, wetter areas could potentially get wetter, effects of sea level rise, and the kind of general effects that we're seeing already in the last 20 years that folks have anecdotally shared with us. And that may be, ramping up in the next several decades. So general concerns about climate change and how we can, include that in future planning, especially for water resources.
So I'm gonna pick it up from here. Okay, so while we were going out and talking with all of you, we were also doing some research and some reading to get an overview and understanding of the water resources on Moloka'i. We've had a lot of people tell us that it's super complex, and it sure is. And we're still learning, and we're still trying to sort all of this out. So I'm sure there's going to be some questions, and we would really appreciate if people could help us to understand this better or see if we got something wrong. So kind of as a general overview, we'll start with groundwater resources. So there are 188 registered wells on the island, and about 40% of them are actually reporting their pumpage. So you can see by this table here that about 2 million gallons per day is being reported pumped from the central, this blue area, part of the island. From the southeast, about 800,000 gallons per day, if you combine all of those totals. In the northeast, about 37,000 gallons per day. So it totals less than 3 million gallons of water per day being pumped. The sustainable yield, so the rate at which you can withdraw water without impairing the use or the quality of the water or the source, is 79 million gallons of water per day. So it sounds like there's a lot of water, and because pumpage is really only about 3.5% of sustainable yield, but we also need to understand that a lot of that water is in the northeast sector. You can see there's a sustainable yield of 44 million gallons per day in the northeast, if you look at the top right-hand side of that graphic. And a lot of that is hard to get to. So there are some constraints going on here. Okay. Looking at surface water, there are 36 perennial streams on the island, and it's shown on the graphic there. There are 6 active stream diversions that are actually reporting their use. So that's only about 15% of the active diversions. The mountain water system owned by Moloka'i Ranch, so that's kind of that light orange, those diversions listed on the table on the left. They total about 8 million gallons of water per day. The Moloka'i irrigation system, the MIS, about 2 million. And the final one is Pu'ohoku Ranch at 41,000. So, one thing to kind of notice about this is that all of the perennial streams and diversions are on the east side of the island, but a lot of the agricultural use, and this is something that Lily has mentioned, as some of the issues that were brought up in the past, a lot of the agricultural use, which is the main user of surface water on the island, is in the central and west area. Okay. So looking at where we get our water from, there are 9 public water systems on the island, and they're owned by 6 operators. So these are the 6 operators. They all pull groundwater. So you have, Maui Department of Water Supply, Department of Hawaiian Homelands, Wai'ola o Moloka'i, Moloka'i Public Utilities, Kawela Plantation, and the National Park Service. At the bottom there, you can see their reported total water use. And what we did was to get kind of a baseline, we took a 5-year average. And this is so that, it kind of averages out if there's any one particular year that uses an exceptionally high amount of water or an exceptionally low amount of water, depending on what's going on that year. So for example, if we had, drought conditions one year, that might be a year where you have extremely high use, and that's not the norm. So using that 5-year average kind of helps us to kind of normalize that. We also kind of rounded the numbers just to make it easier to kind of take in. So we have the different, we'll go through some of these uses in a little bit too, but they're listed here for you to see. One other thing to note is for the National Park Service, we didn't have the 5-year average. So their use is actually for the calendar year 2020. Other water systems on the island. So we have the Moloka'i irrigation system, pulling surface water, mountain water system, again, surface water. Other private, so this is groundwater, private groundwater wells. And one thing to note is that none of these are reporting their use. So we had to try and figure out how to account for their use. So what we did was we used their permitted amount. So that's the total you'll see there, the 119,000 gallons per day. Another private use is other surface water diversions. And again, no reported diversion amounts. So what we use to account for something is the use at the time of when the diversion was declared back in around 92. Okay. Okay, so kind of trying to summarize the existing water use. All of these numbers were from the previous 2 slides. So you have the different water systems on the left-hand side of that table, what they reported as their water use, or what we tried to figure out could be used for their water use, and how much of the total water use they account for. And then the pie chart on the right uses the same numbers. So what you can kind of see is that the largest water use is for non-potable water. The Moloka'i irrigation system accounts for about 37% of the water use. And then other private surface water, so that's that kind of mustard color on the left-hand side of the pie chart. And so these are the stream diversions that you need to remember are unverified in terms of their use, because they do not report, or they have not been reporting. So that was about 33%. And then for potable water, Maui Department of Water Supply accounted for about 11% of the use, and then Department of Hawaiian Homelands about 6%. Looking at the existing water demand a different way, we can look at it, what is the water being used for? So we have different water use categories that the Water Commission uses. And so it's domestic residential use, domestic non-residential, military, agriculture, industrial, and irrigation. The largest water use by far is for agriculture, over 70%. And then followed by domestic residential use at about 22%. Just taking a tour through some of the larger water systems. So this is just kind of a visual of the Maui Department of Water Supply water system. Their service areas are shown in the bright pink. Their wells are identified with the yellow dots, and then their water mains with the yellow. So you can kind of see where they're servicing. DHHL, the blue is their service area. The red hatch are all of their lands. And then the yellow, again, are the water lines, with the yellow dot being their well in Kuala Pu'u. Moloka'i irrigation system. So they have 4 intakes, so surface water diversions in Waikolu Valley. But as you can see, it services agriculture in the central area. Moloka'i Ranch. So they have several water systems. They have 3 public water systems that use potable water coming from well 17 in Kuala Pu'u. So that's that yellow dot. Their potable water line is that blue line. It kind of goes under the pink in a bit in the central area. The pink line is their mountain water system, and they get their water from several diversions in Waikolu and Kawela. And then Kawela Plantation is actually a pretty small system. They have several wells. They don't use all of them, but they pretty much use their water on site. Okay, so kind of moving forward to what the projected water demands might be in the future. So we looked ahead to 2040, and we need to look at multiple water demand scenarios. So we looked at the low growth, a mid growth, and a high growth. The low growth, we were thinking, okay, there might not be any change going on. So we kind of kept water demand stable. For the mid growth, which we're saying is the most likely scenario, this might get a little complicated, so I'm going to take a little bit of time on this. So for the Maui Department of Water Supply, Moloka'i Ranch water systems, we said that there would be an increase of 0.5% per year. And this kind of reflects the growth scenarios in the Moloka'i Island Plan. For Department of Hawaiian Homelands and the Moloka'i Irrigation System and Kalaupapa, these are all state water systems. So we took the water demands from the 2020 State Water Projects Plan. And one thing to note for the Moloka'i Irrigation System, the MIS, what we assumed for this was that the only growth in water demand for the MIS would be just for the DHHL water demands. And then there would be no additional growth in water demand for non-DHHL users. For the mountain water system, so this is the Moloka'i Ranch non-potable system, we used the planned water use that came out of the Water Commission's assessment of when they were looking at the petition for in-stream flow standard amendment. And so this just kind of came out last month, I believe. We looked at their assessment of water use, and we thought that it looked pretty reasonable, so we used that. And then for the remaining water systems, so Kawela, the other private surface water diversions and wells, we kept the use flat, so no growth. And then for the high growth scenario, for the Maui Department of Water Supply water system, we did an increase of 1% per year. And this again is reflected in or by the Moloka'i Island Plan for their high growth. For DHHL, Kalaupapa water systems, we kept it the same as in the mid-growth scenario. For the Moloka'i irrigation system, we used their projections that were in the 2019 Agricultural Water Use and Development Plan. And so the difference here between the mid and the high growth, so for the mid, again, we just said that Department of Hawaiian Homelands would account for all of the growth in water demand. In the high growth, there are additional water demands accounted for. So non-DHHL use was also accounted for in the high growth. For Moloka'i Ranch and for their potable and their mountain water system, as well as for Kawela Plantation, this was assuming full use of their entitled lands. So for Moloka'i Ranch, we did get those projections directly from them. And then for Kawela Plantation, they have about 39 additional lots that they could actually, oh, not yet, that they could actually, that are still vacant and could actually be used. So we accounted for that. And then for the private surface water diversions and wells, we assumed no growth. Okay. So this is kind of what the water demands are looking like when we are projecting out to 2040. So the existing, so the baseline is on the left. Low growth stays flat. And then if you're looking at the mid growth, so the blue is going to be your potable water demand, and that increased by about 1 million gallons of water per day. And that was mostly from DHHL water demand. Your non-potable water demand in the orange increased by about 6 million gallons of water per day. And this is mostly from the Moloka'i irrigation system. Again, mostly the Department of Hawaiian Homeland's water needs. For the high water demand scenario all the way on the right, you have an increase in potable water demand by about 2 million gallons of water per day. And so this is pretty much about half of that would be from DHHL. And then the other half is from Moloka'i Ranch and Department of Water Supply increased use. And then the orange non-potable use increased by about 10 million gallons of water per day. And this was mostly from the Moloka'i irrigation system, which was about 9 million gallons of water. And then another 1 million gallons of water from Moloka'i Ranch. Okay. So, you know, now that we kind of have some draft numbers for water demand and future water demand, and, you know, we're still kind of taking a look at those numbers to just make sure that they make sense and wanting to kind of check those with some of the water providers. But it kind of gives us an idea of, you know, what direction we're heading in. And so this is kind of just a little diagram to kind of show you some of where the water demand is and where some of the sources are. So if you take a look at the west side, there's about 500,000 gallons of water per day that's the demand. Their sustainable yield is about 4 million gallons per day. And they have no surface water diversions. Again, no perennial streams there. In the central area, there's about 9 million gallons of water per day of mostly non-potable agricultural demand. Their groundwater sustainable yield is 9 mgd, and again, no surface water diversions. Moving over to the northeast, there's about 1 million gallons per day of demand, mostly for non-potable. And that actually is the small private surface water diversions, which again are unverified because they are non-reporting. So that's kind of an assumption on our part. Their sustainable yield is again a large 44 million gallons per day, and their surface water diversions account for almost 3 million gallons of water per day. And, you know, just remembering that all of that water that's diverted is used outside of the northeast sector. For southeast, there's about 3 million gallons of water per day being used, projected to be used. And there's a sustainable yield of 22 mgd, and most of their 3 million gallons per day in surface water diversions is used out of the sector. So I know we said that we would talk about some options, and we really haven't gotten far at all on options. We are just starting to think about options. So these are just kind of the types of water source options we are starting to think about. And we would love to hear your thoughts about what you think might be feasible or just not appropriate for Moloka'i. So starting off with conservation. So these are things like fixing leaks, trying to minimize evaporation from open reservoirs, that type of thing, or even, you know, in-home conservation. Resource protection, so making sure that our aquifers are maintained, that groundwater infiltrates into them, that our streams are flowing. Groundwater wells, so is it appropriate in any particular location to either increase or add wells? That's something that we'll look at. Desalinization, so this is taking seawater or brackish water and turning it into fresh water for consumption. Surface water use, again, are there any locations where it is appropriate to either increase or add diversions? We understand that there are a lot of issues with that. So those, we would need to take a careful look at that kind of thing. On-site stormwater capture. So things like rain barrels, is this an option anywhere on the island to, so we don't have to use maybe potable water for irrigation, if we can use these kinds of things on site. Centralized recycled water treatment. So where you have a wastewater treatment plant, can you add on additional treatment so that you can reuse that water for things like irrigation or agriculture? And then household gray water reuse. So can you use some of your gray water from within your own home for things like irrigation? Excuse me. So that's really as far as we've gotten on the options.
Who does this?
Okay, so looking at some of the next steps, and again, this is next steps in the planning process, not next steps necessarily in this meeting. So we are going to continue with meetings with community folks, technical experts on specific critical water issues, and see how far we can work through them and how they can be incorporated into this plan. We're going to look at further detailing out and confirming the projected water demand. Again, these are draft numbers, so this is our rough first cut, and we'll need to continue to work on them in order to have appropriate numbers for inclusion in the plan. We'll be investigating water source options, as well as trying to identify potential water source options for specific demands. And then, of course, the next kind of step in the timeline would be trying to put together a draft of this plan for you folks to look at and for us to kind of work through and refine. So we're going to do some open discussion now. I definitely know that there are comments and questions that will need to refer back to the slideshow. I think what I would like to do, we have one person who called in over the telephone, and we've had a handful of folks who have provided comments in the chat box. I think we'll start with the chat box, and we'll go through each of those comments and questions. And if it requires, like kind of jumping back in the slideshow, then we'll kind of work through that. And then the next thing, because folks who call in over the telephone, mahalo to our telephone caller, they don't get the full functionality of the platform, so they're not able to view the presentation and whatnot. So I'd like to give them preference in asking, in starting with comments or questions, and then from there we can open it up to everybody who's calling in over the app, since you guys have a little bit more functionality and it's a little bit easier for you folks to participate in the discussion. So I'm going to start with the chat box, like I said. Let me scroll back. We already mentioned Jonathan's comment about public trust. Also, I got a heads up that one of our, the channel in between Moloka'i and Lanai is misspelled on the map. So Kalohi channel, not Kalolu channel, and we will correct that. Sherry, go ahead.
Did we want to offer people the form?
Oh yeah, You can go ahead and put that in the chat. So we also have a like a Google form. If you don't want to put anything into the chat now, or if you want to kind of ruminate on things and decide what you want to say and how you want to say it, or put it into another location, there's a link to a Google form, and it's basically just capturing any comments. And it's like a open-ended long answer. So you guys are welcome to ask away if you would prefer to do that, as opposed to kind of asking your questions verbally or dropping into the chat box in this meeting. Sherry, did you have another? Okay. So one of the comments that we have from Auntie Lori Buchanan, I have concerns about sustainable yield and how that is calculated when we have little to no data to run the scenario. Comment from Jonathan. Are the uses reported from Wai'ola and MPU legally permitted uses by CWER? Sherry or Marty, if you can chime in on that one.
Well, 17 doesn't have a water use permit in place. And that is their source.
Sherry, are you able to answer about Wai'ola?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys not hear?
Oh, we heard.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Wai'ola and MPU.
Moloka'i Public Utilities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they're both Moloka'i Ranch.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the answer to that one then, folks, is no. They are not legally permitted at this time. Mahina posted North Shore, northeast water sources are not just hard to get to, but maybe we don't want to get to it. That's how we still have spring-fed perennial rivers back there. I think that is a point that we have heard several times as well. Mahalo, Auntie Lori, about the GIS maps. I posted in there that the presentations are going to be put online. So folks who want to have more time to kind of look over the maps, you can do that once we put them on the project website. Uncle Glenn mentioned that DHHL also supplies water for Kalai. And I think that's through the county delivery system. Sherry, did you want to comment on that?
Oh, no, just, yes, that's right.
Okay, Mahina asked, is there a way to compare growth scenarios to actual experienced growth?
I'm not sure I understand the
There's been
question.
very little growth.
Oh, I see. Understanding the growth scenarios versus
Actual
the growth that you've already been experiencing until.
Which is very little.
Yeah, we can kind of take a look at growth in the last few decades and kind of project out and see what that looks like in comparison to our projected growth. We can do that.
Well, the plan is supposed to say, this is the probable future. Tell them that.
Oh, they can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, Bruce.
Add to that too. Yeah, I think that's really important aspect actually to look at historic data as an alternative projection, because I mean, ultimately we want to have a growth, a demand projection that is very realistic. So, you know, there's this comparison of low to high, but ultimately the selected scenario should be taking all those things into consideration, and they may be different for different system and areas. So historic growth is super important.
Eva.
And we did look at that, and that is why low or no growth is one of the options, because if you look at population in the past to now, I think Moloka'i is at about the same population as around 1985 right now, or at least in 2020.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marty and Eva. Oh, Bruce, go
This
ahead.
is Bruce again. Well, however, the wild card in future water demand, I think, is agricultural water. You know, some people have commented in some of our conversations with Moloka'i folks that Moloka'i could produce much more food than the island currently produces. The but agriculture needs a lot of water. So if there's going to be major agricultural expansion on Moloka'i, that means a lot more water demand.
Comment from Auntie Lori. She said, whoa, I think not enough data again for the 2040 scenario. There's a comment from Karen H. What were the ranch's projections? Can we see them?
The ranches.
Yeah. Yeah. We can make that available. We don't have a slide for that right now. My apologies. We're trying to really, there are so many ways to cut the information and try to present, and we didn't want to bog down the presentation into a 2-hour kind of thing. But we can make that breakdown available.
Comment from Kiani. Full use of Moloka'i properties land and assuming they get a water permit, ? That they currently don't have. Comment from Auntie Lori. Precautionary principle definitely applies to these water demand scenarios. Comment for Uncle Glenn. Projections seem very conservative for the next 20 years. Many awarded lots in DHHL are not occupied. Many homesteaders want to subdivide their lots for their children. 150 ag lots in Kalama'ula are not occupied. Most of the sustainable yield, for West Moloka'i is saline. Jonathan, I see you have a raised hand. I will get to you as soon as we have gotten through some of these comments. Comment from Auntie Lori, I would have a very difficult time supporting desalinization. Comment from Uncle Glenn, climate change is affecting agriculture and is increasing weekly demands beyond 2 acre inches. No real rain for the last 2 months.
Lily?
Yes.
Maybe can you stop screen sharing what we're answering?
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Sorry, I'm scrolling back. Okay, so gray water reuse, yes. DOH, this is comment from Auntie Lori. Gray water reuse, yes. DOH and county need to work on that together. Uncle Glenn commented, sea level rise will affect the quality of groundwater and may force wells more inshore. Auntie Lori, Townscape, your photos and graphics are beautiful. Well done, thank you. Mahalo, Auntie Lori. Gigi Kyrell from DHHL, aloha reminder, DHHL's water system produces potable water and some customers, lessees and commercial, use the water for irrigation / non-potable use. In the slides, do the potable / non-potable numbers reflect this?
I'm going to defer to Marty on that one.
I don't think so.
Okay, so you want to know if the potable and non-potable DHHL water is depicted? We have the overview, but we don't, for tonight's, we don't have the DHHL potable, non-potable on a slide, no.
Marty, I think what she's asking is
Do we have
the irrigation use that is being serviced by potable listed under the potable grouping?
No,
or
I'm
okay.
sorry. The irrigation that is being served by potable is depicted as potable. The irrigation that is non-potable is depicted as non-potable. Sorry.
A comment from Rudy, vibrant rainforest is a good on-site water storage. Lori, so there are no reports from well 17 since they have no permit.
They do report, even though they don't have a permit.
Comment from Mahina. I think we get stuck thinking we have to provide for exponential growth, but at what point do we say we cannot accommodate the growth? Climate change, in parentheses, drought, changing weather patterns, etc., is going to increase water scarcity. Comment from Auntie Lori, agree, Mahina. Comment from Kay, was water recharge limitations due to less rain and precipitation in the coming years included in the projected scenarios?
So the scenarios right now are looking at water demand and not with the recharge, which would be kind of a supply side. So that's kind of our next step, is looking at what are the options and what is the source availability. So those are some things that we are going to be taking into consideration.
Comment from Uncle Glenn, most of ag water used, especially in the Central Plains, goes back to the aquifer. Auntie Lori said, ag needs its own meeting. For example, the ag wild card is, are we growing food to sustain, in parentheses, real food for consumption, or grow products primarily for export? If it's for the latter, then the monetary benefits need to be realized. That's a bigger discussion. Uncle Glenn mentioned, I don't think anyone has the DHHL. Sorry, I don't think anyone has the DHHL numbers on potable water that's being used for agriculture. Mahina, to everyone, I think the impacts to traditional cultural agricultural practices by stream diversions to support conventional agriculture should be recognized. Uncle Walter Riddy commented, is there a worst case scenarios option due to climate change? Comment from Gigi, FYI, DHHL charges an ag rate for irrigation. We can try to pull from our billing records on DHHL potable used for ag. That would be super helpful, Gigi. We'd very much appreciate that. Auntie Lori said, do you have data / numbers? Oh, hold on. Do you have data / numbers for in-stream flows for north side needed to sustain life and watershed?
Just answering that one, no. We do know that the Water Commission is doing some studies right now on stream flows on Moloka'i, but they are in process. So unfortunately, not yet.
But
we do have one person, like I said, who called in over the telephone. Telephone caller, if you would like to ask a question or provide a comment, I'm going to give you kind of first chance at that. The way you can do that from your phone is by dialing *6. That will unmute you. If you don't wish to comment, then no need. But if you do wish to comment, you can go ahead and dial *6, and that will kind of ping on my screen, and I'll know to kind of turn over to you. Comment from, oh, call-in user, go ahead.
Aloha. Thank you so much for giving the opportunity to share since I'm not on the Zoom thing. My name's Colleen, and I've been, I still have a lot to learn on the whole water situation. I know it's super complex, and I've been studying, and watching all you guys' meetings and everything, and just looking at the land and learning about it all the time. And I really liked your guys' solutions, some of the solutions that you've come up with so far, especially the one with the gray water and the county coordination with allowing gray water systems and promoting that more because of all of the things going on. Yeah. And an idea that I've been thinking about for a while, and I don't know how feasible it is or if anybody's looked at it, but you know, with all of the changing storms and whatnot, like we don't get the rain like we used to, a little bit at a time. We're getting it in these huge dumps. And then we have this runoff problems and, you know, just a waterfall of problems that come from these big runoff situations. And I wondered, has anything been considered about dams or utilizing some of the fish pond techniques and whatever kind of traditional techniques that might be out there? I know some people that I've spoken with who say they know how to do the, you know, make a catchment pond, and you can make a clay liner kind of thing. And has that been looked at, and is it feasible to do something like that? That's something that I've been wondering. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Colleen. I think that's definitely something that we can add to the list. Again, we're hoping to just start that conversation, and that's something that we're going to have to continue to investigate and hopefully have more community meetings to kind of talk about what is appropriate and where that might be appropriate. So thank you for that contribution. Much appreciated.
Thank you. One additional thing, if I may.
Sure, sure.
To use a regenerative permaculture kind of type mindset about that as well, where if we could capture this water instead of having it run off into the ocean and all the problems that that creates, that if we could capture them and create our own like new watershed areas where then, you know, it's been done. There's places, there's a lot of examples of this happening where, you know, once you can provide the water source, well, then you can use the shores of that water source to put trees, and once you have plant life, then you're going to be bringing more rain in, and that ionic transfer can happen, but you need a little bit water to get started with, right? And you know, that's what those, if we were able to do dams or capture the water in some way and have these holding areas instead of the reservoirs, like the, you know, using that, some of those methods too, but create them more as landscapes for that will help will help the animals. It'll help keep the animals out of the agriculture fields, things like this. So I don't want to take any more of your time, but anyway.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha. I do want to hop over to the chat box again. And then folks, if you have comments or questions that you wanted to ask or things you wanted to share, again, you're welcome to put it into the chat box. You're welcome to virtually raise your hand on here. You can do that by clicking on the more button and then reactions and raise hand. Or if your taskbar already shows reactions, you can click on that and show that you want to raise your hand. You can also turn your video on and that will pop you up to the top of my screen, and I'll know to call on you that way as well. Jumping over to the chat box, there's a comment from, Auntie Lori. So I think the last thing I said was regarding the in-stream flows, that question. So the next one is, that's why we can't take from the North Shore more than what is taken from Waihanau and Waikolu for the MIS. Uncle Glenn commented, many homesteaders have requested ag water from domestic water system and have been denied, so numbers are inaccurate. Auntie Lori said Waihanau is diverted for Kalaupapa's primary use. Gigi Kyrell said, mahalo, Uncle Glenn. Yes, we are aware not all ag users may not have the ag rate. We can provide what we have with a footnote on this, that the ag use numbers most likely are low. Auntie Lori said, agree with Mahina about traditional use of water should be weighted against other uses. Karen H commented, fish ponds are cultural treasures. Using them as catchment ponds could destroy their traditional value to the people and to the Aina. Mahalo to everyone. I don't see any raised hands. If anyone wanted to share comments or ask questions, now is a good time to do so. Uncle Mango, I see your hand up. Oh, you're still muted. If you can unmute, Uncle. Perfect, thank you.
Sorry about that. I came in a little late. I apologize. I was really in the middle of something. But I wanna that lady that was just on a little while ago. I wanna echo, I guess, what she was saying. I was doing a bunch of stuff earlier on, and I came across an article about flood farming on Lanai. And I know I mentioned that in another meeting with Townscape back a while back, but also have been doing a lot of research in that lately. And, you know, most of Polynesia does flood farming. I think it's something that we should be looking at with runoff, because that's what they do. Every time it comes to a heavy rain, they capture that rainwater and they use it within a particular way. Our kupunas did that. Lanai had that. I have it was a PDF. Somebody did that research, and I have the papers on that one. It's still on Lanai. They still have the rock formations and everything like that. How they used to catch the water, divert it, put it into certain areas to be using it. So it's called flood farming, But I also talked with a few Tongans and Samoans, and they do a lot of that in Tonga, Samoa, even in parts of Tahiti, also Marquesas Islands. And so I think it's something that we should at least look into, because we do have a lot of runoff. It is a problem, but I mean, the basics of that whole problem, it starts at the top, not really at the bottom. And we've only get to see the results. If we can get up to the top, I believe that we could either stop it, or at least we can capture it and do good. But like exactly like how that other lady was mentioning, we can use that water instead of letting it just run away. Mahalo.
Yeah, mahalo, Uncle Mango. We'll definitely add that onto our list and include that in the work that we're doing as far as investigating potential options and seeing if that can be a solution for some of these critical issues. So thank you very much. I wanted to jump back over to the chat really quickly.
Aloha.
Hi, Colleen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I see that you're unmuted.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I thank you, Uncle, for the mana'o and your support for what you shared there. I just wanted to make one clarification, because I heard you read a comment about the fish ponds. I wasn't saying to use the fish ponds in catchment fields in any way. No way, that would be horrible. But I'm saying using the techniques for containing the water, maybe transferring those techniques into something to contain the catchment water in a different place, separate from the fish ponds, of course. That's all I wanted to make sure that I didn't miscommunicate that.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen, for the clarification.
Mahalo.
Yep, mahalo. Auntie Lori, I see your hand up. Give me 1 second real quick, please. I wanted to jump to the chat box. So comment from Uncle Glenn. There's a lot of evapotranspiration from reservoirs, and I don't know if we're accounting for this. Some of this exceeds water use for some systems. Such as Moloka'i Ranch Mountain Water System. Comment from Kay to everyone: creating kipuka for reforestation and stopping runoff in the deforested parts with protection from ungulates may help. Comment from Uncle Glenn: expansion of the watershed needs to be a part of the plan in light of feral animal deforestation. Thank you, everybody in the chat box. Auntie Lori, go ahead. Thank you.
How's it? Good job, Townscape. You guys' PowerPoint is beautiful. I wanted to go back to the question of sustainable yield because I wanted to go back to basics. My concern is that we get fixated on this number. Yeah, the sustainable yield number, but we don't go back and do our homework of how we came to that number. And that number is important because everything else is based on the number. So if we say, I get 1 glass of water, guarantee I get this glass of water. So you can drink this much and you can drink that much. So, you know, come to find out, oh my gosh, we only had half a glass of water. We didn't have one. Oh, and so we ran out when Auntie came last and she never had water. So I'm concerned about going back and checking the scientific data. The bad thing is we haven't had a lot of data from USGS and everything through the years. We know more in-stream flows. We hardly get any number on rainfall from very few systems that have been tracking it for a while. And so I really wanted to go back to the sustainable yield number because I really don't think that given all of the different stuff that we're going to throw into the box and at the end spit out numbers, to me, that's the whole plan. We can talk a lot about scenarios and things that we can do, like, you know, you get one problem, just stop using water and energy. So then you're gonna make sure you get, you know, but don't overuse it. So I would like to revisit that at some point in time. Because I know, like, you know, start running down the road on numbers and we questioning the numbers. So thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Lori.
If I could, thank you so much for that. And actually, Bruce is probably looking at me because he had told me earlier today that I need to couch those sustainable yield numbers by saying, you know, that yes, there are a lot of uncertainties with those numbers. They get revised from time to time with new additional updated information and looking at things that we may not have taken into account before, looking at things like, you know, impacts on ecosystems and looking at things like climate change. So point well taken. Yeah, thank you so much for making that statement.
Okay, I want to jump to the chat box real quick. We had a comment from Uncle Walter about, can we get copies of your presentation, especially the maps? And also a comment from Mahesh, will the slides shown tonight be posted online in time for folks to look at before the Saturday morning meeting? Yes and yes. So we will be putting those onto the project website. So it'll be a PDF so folks can download it and review. Also, if you folks are on the email update list, if you shared your email with us to be on the email update list, as soon as those are posted and live on the project website, I'll send out an email notice so that you guys will kind of get a notice that they've been posted. Okay, and then there's a comment. Agree, K to everyone. Agree, Auntie, the sustainable yield number has to be looked at and updated. Mahina poi poi to everyone. Sustainable yield is based on a flawed formula. In my opinion, it does not account for current and future conditions or for traditional customary uses. Uncle Glenn to everyone, I agree with Lori on sustainable yield. I still remember when John Mink stated that Kuala Pu'u Aquifer had 7 MGD, but he didn't multiply that correctly. Jonathan Scheuer to everyone, for what it's worth, I gave a presentation to Water Resources Research Seminar. What does sustainable yield sustain? What and who is left out? The recording. Oh, thank you so much, Jonathan. So in the chat box, there is a link to the recording. So much appreciated. You guys can grab that link if you would like. Also, I noticed that Gigi, you had unmuted. I remuted you, but did you have a comment? If you did have a comment, feel free to unmute and we can make time now.
No, I kept getting a message that I was being unmuted, so I don't know
Oh,
why.
okay. Oh, okay, no
Thank
worries.
you.
Okay, thanks, G. Okay, did anyone else have comments or questions? Again, we're going to be posting the presentation online. It'll be on the project website. I'll send out a notice about that so you get the link so that you can download it. And we will have it up before our next meeting, which is going to be this coming Saturday, the 12th, which will be a daytime meeting. So 10 a.m. until 12 p.m. is the time slot we have allotted. Okay, I'm not seeing any more activity in the chat box or anyone kind of raising your hand. If you have any additional questions or comments, Sherry has dropped in a link to the Google form. So if anything kind of pops up later, you're ruminating on something, you're welcome to utilize the Google form. You can drop your comments in there. We'll be looking at all of those and kind of compiling them into our research and the work that we're doing. Also, Sherry, can you share our email contacts as well? So if anyone wants to reach out to us directly by email, if you don't have it already, you can grab that from the chat box. Auntie Lori, to everyone, thank you, Townscape. Uncle Glenn, mahalo everyone, many good comments. Yeah, thank you everybody for participating. Really great comments and really good guidance for us. It's always appreciated. Mahalo nui, mahina poi poi to everybody. So we'll go ahead and wrap up now. And please reach out if you folks have more questions. Sherry's sharing the project website link as well. So feel free to grab any of these links that are useful to you folks. Mahalo, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lily. Super nice job. Thanks, Sherry and Bruce.
Thank you, Eva.
It's great fun. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that'd be good. And I'm sure that with a little more time from folks to see the demand projections, there may be more specific questions on Saturday, I think.
Yeah, maybe we'll put together some, somebody had asked for the slide on the Moloka'i Ranch demands.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah. More fun, Marty.
Thanks, Marty. You and Sherry have been
Marty's
having a
brain
great time.
Ah,
Sherry just loves crunching all these numbers.
that's right. Numbers.
Oh, we had a lot of fun, didn't we, Sherry?
Okay, well,